There is a two-word sentence some men say without raising their voice, without trying, and a woman remembers it longer than anything he said before it. You have probably heard it. You may have even said it yourself, once, without noticing what it did. Right now, in ordinary conversations happening all around you, older men are using this phrase and walking away with a kind of attention younger men spend years chasing and never quite catch. It is not a trick. It is not a line. It is something quieter than that, and that is exactly why it works. Most men miss it because they are listening for the wrong thing. They are watching for compliments, for jokes, for the clever comeback that supposedly wins her over. But this is not built from cleverness. It is built from restraint. By the end of this video, you will know the exact two words, why they land the way they do on a psychological level, and how to use them so they sound like you, not like a script you memorized. Stay with me because once you hear it, you will start noticing it everywhere. Most men think attraction is built with the right compliment. Older men figured out it is built with the right restraint. There is a version of masculine communication that gets almost no attention online because it does not look impressive on the surface. It does not involve saying more, being funnier, or performing confidence louder than the next man in the room. It involves saying less and meaning every part of what is said. Watch the way an older man responds when a woman shares something vulnerable or tests him with a comment meant to provoke a reaction. He does not rush to fill the space. He does not over-explain himself or defend a position nobody attacked. He simply responds briefly and lets the moment breathe. That pause is not accidental. It is the entire mechanism. Younger men, by contrast, tend to flood conversation with words the moment tension appears. Of course, this does not mean every talkative man is anxious or every quiet man is confident. Context always matters here. But there is a pattern underneath the noise, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Excess words often signal a need for approval. Restraint, used correctly, signals the opposite. It says, I am not performing for you. I am simply here, and I am not going anywhere. Think back to a conversation that once seemed ordinary. One where you walked away without realizing what had actually just happened. Maybe you said something short, almost dismissive, and she brought it up again days later. That was not luck. That was restraint doing something compliments never could. Compliments ask for a reaction. Restraint creates one. This does not mean silence itself is attractive. A man who says nothing communicates absence, not strength. The distinction lies in intention. Restraint is chosen. Silence is empty. One radiates control, the other radiates disconnection. Older men understand this difference instinctively, often without ever studying it, because they have lived through enough conversations to feel where the line sits. Now, you might be thinking, isn't this just a personality trait some men are born with? And sometimes, yes, some men are naturally quieter. But here is the detail that separates a personality trait from a deliberate signal. Timing. A naturally quiet man is quiet everywhere, indiscriminately. A man using restraint as signal becomes quiet specifically at the moment where most men get loud. That precision is what a woman's attention locks onto, even if she could never explain why. To understand why restraint works, you have to understand what a woman is actually listening for underneath the words themselves. She is rarely listening to your sentence. She is listening to how steady you were while you said it. This is the part almost no one explains clearly because it sounds too simple to be true. Underneath the actual content of a conversation, there is a second, quieter layer of communication happening constantly. Tone, pacing, timing, the space between words. Behavioral researchers call this emotional pacing, which simply means the rhythm at which someone reveals thought and feeling through speech. A woman is not consciously analyzing your pacing, she is feeling it, the way you feel a room's temperature without checking a thermostat. Here is where it becomes interesting. When a man speaks quickly, stacks reassurances, or rushes to explain himself, that pacing reads as anxious, even if the words themselves sound confident. The content says one thing, the rhythm says another. And rhythm almost always wins. This is why a man can say all the right words and still fail to land, while another man says almost nothing and creates an entirely different reaction. Older men, often without realizing they are doing it, slow their pacing the moment tension enters a conversation. Instead of rushing to smooth things over, they let a beat pass. That beat does something specific. It signals emotional security, the sense that nothing about this moment threatens him, so there is no need to fix it quickly. Security is one of the most consistently attractive signals across almost every study on interpersonal attraction, precisely because it is rare and difficult to fake convincingly. This is not to say enthusiasm is unattractive. A man who is warm, present, and engaged is not the same as a man who is anxious. The difference is not how much he speaks, but whether his pacing changes under pressure. Warmth stays consistent, anxiety accelerates. That is the detail most men never learn to separate. Picture two versions of the same moment. A woman goes quiet mid-conversation, unsure whether to share something personal. In the first version, the man immediately fills the silence, asking questions, offering reassurance, trying to coax the words out faster. In the second version, the man simply waits, present but unhurried, letting her arrive at her own pace. The second version, almost without exception, reads as safer. And safety, paired with just enough warmth, is what opens the door to real attraction rather than temporary excitement. You might be wondering whether this steadiness can be practiced, or whether it only belongs to men who already feel calm inside. It can absolutely be practiced. Steadiness is less about internal calm and more about resisting the urge to react instantly. That resistance is a skill, and like most skills, it strengthens the more it gets used deliberately. That is the moment most men walk away from without realizing it. There is one exact moment in almost every conversation where this steadiness either proves itself or quietly falls apart, and that is where the two words come in. Picture the exact second she goes quiet, or pulls back, or tests you without saying so directly. That second decides more than the previous 20 minutes combined. Every conversation eventually reaches a small fork in the road, a moment where the natural flow shifts and something is being quietly measured. It could be a slight pause after a joke that did not land the way she expected. It could be her mentioning another man's name and watching your face for a reaction. It could simply be her going quiet for 3 or 4 seconds longer than feels comfortable. None of these moments are dramatic on the surface. All of them are underneath. Psychologists sometimes refer to these as micro-tests, small, often unconscious behaviors used to gauge someone's emotional reliability before investing further trust. A woman is rarely doing this with calculated intent. It is instinctive, the same way you might instinctively tense up before stepping onto ice to check if it holds your weight. She is checking whether the moment holds. Most men fail this test not through anything dramatic, but through subtle overcorrection. The moment tension appears, they rush to explain, to reassure, to fill the space with proof that everything is fine. Watch closely, and you will notice the pattern. Extra words, a slightly higher pitch, a small laugh that does not quite match the moment. None of it is intentional. It happens almost automatically, the nervous system reacting to perceived threat the same way it might react to any other small danger. Of course, this is not a conscious flaw most men are even aware of. It is simply what anxiety sounds like when translated into speech. The problem is not the anxiety itself. Every man feels it occasionally. The problem is what the anxiety produces in that specific moment, because that production becomes the data she is unconsciously collecting. Here is the part that surprises most men when they hear it for the first time. This test is rarely about what was said before it. A woman can enjoy 20 minutes of genuinely great conversation and still walk away recalibrating everything based on how the final 10 seconds were handled. The brain weighs emotionally charged moments far more heavily than neutral ones, which means this small window carries disproportionate influence over the entire interaction. You might be thinking, surely one awkward pause cannot undo an otherwise good conversation. And you would be right. A single instance rarely changes much on its own. But across repeated interactions, this exact moment compounds. Each time a man over-explains under pressure, it reinforces a slowly forming impression. Each time he holds steady instead, it reinforces the opposite. Patterns, not single events, are what eventually shape how a woman feels around a particular man. Remember what I told you at the start? That there was one signal most men not only miss, but actively misread. We are getting close to it now. Older men do not have a longer answer for this moment. They have a shorter one, and it is only 2 words long. The words are simple enough that you have probably said them before without knowing what they were doing. The 2 words are, take your time. Said correctly, in the right moment, with the right pacing, these 2 words carry more weight than almost anything else a man can offer in a moment of hesitation or tension. At first glance, this might sound too plain to matter, but look closer at what the phrase actually communicates. It does not ask her to hurry. It does not ask her to explain herself. It does not attempt to fix the discomfort of the pause. Instead, it hands the moment back to her, entirely, without demanding anything in return. That handoff is rare, and rarity is part of why it registers so strongly. Psychologically, this phrase functions as what researchers sometimes call an autonomy signal, a small verbal cue that communicates respect for another person's independent pace and decision-making without pressure attached. Most interactions, especially early ones, are quietly filled with subtle pressure. Pressure to respond quickly, to explain, to perform certainty even when it is not fully felt. A phrase that removes pressure, cleanly and without condition, stands out precisely because it is so uncommon. There is a second layer underneath this. When a man says, take your time, he is implicitly demonstrating that he is not anxious about the outcome. Anxiety demands resolution quickly. Security can afford to wait. By using this phrase, a man is not just being polite, he is quietly revealing something about his own emotional state, and that revelation is what actually creates attraction, far more than the words themselves. This is different from similar-sounding phrases that fail to carry the same weight. Compare it to something like, it's okay, don't worry about it. On the surface, these sound almost identical. But it's okay tends to minimize the moment, brushing past it. Take your time does the opposite. It acknowledges the moment fully, without trying to shrink it, and simply removes the urgency from it. That distinction is subtle, and it is exactly why so few men land on the right phrasing instinctively. Of course, this does not mean these 2 words are magic on their own. Said flatly, or used as a way to disengage from the conversation entirely, the same phrase can read as cold rather than secure. The words carry weight only when paired with continued presence, eye contact, an unhurried tone, a willingness to simply remain in the moment rather than retreat from it. Without that presence, the phrase becomes an exit rather than an invitation. This is where most men who copy this get it wrong. But the same 2 words that build attraction in one context can quietly destroy it in another. And that difference is where most men who copy this get it wrong. This is the part almost nobody explains, and it is the part that separates a man who sounds confident from one who just sounds distant. Once men learn a phrase like this, there is a strong temptation to repeat it mechanically in every pause, every silence, every moment of mild tension. That repetition is precisely what turns a powerful signal into a hollow one. Here is the underlying principle. Calm restraint and emotional withdrawal can look identical on the surface, but they come from entirely different places, and a woman can usually feel the difference even if she cannot name it. Restraint says, I am fully here, simply not rushing. Withdrawal says, I am pulling away and dressing it up as patience. The words might be the same, the emotional undercurrent behind them is not, and that undercurrent is what actually gets received. Older men who use this phrase well tend to pair it with warmth elsewhere in the conversation, a steady gaze, a small, genuine smile, continued engagement once the moment passes. Take your time is never the entire interaction. It is a single beat inside a much larger rhythm of presence. Used in isolation, without that surrounding warmth, it risks reading as punishment, as if the man is stepping back to make a point rather than simply allowing space. You might be wondering how to know whether you are using it as restraint or accidentally using it as withdrawal. The clearest indicator is what happens immediately after you say it. If you find yourself mentally checking out of the conversation, waiting to see if it worked, that is withdrawal wearing restraints clothing. If you remain genuinely engaged, curious, and unbothered by the pause either way, that is real restraint. The words are identical. The internal state behind them is what she is truly responding to. This is also where sincerity becomes essential. A man who uses this phrase as a calculated tactic, purely to produce a reaction, tends to slightly overplay it, pausing a beat too long, delivering it a touch too deliberately. Genuine restraint does not need to be performed carefully because it is not a performance. It is simply what happens when a man is not afraid of the moment in front of him. Once you understand this balance, you stop needing a script because you start hearing it the way she does. So here is the pattern underneath everything we have covered. It was never really about two specific words. It was about what those words revealed: steadiness, patience, and a kind of quiet confidence that does not need to explain itself to be felt. The words are simply the visible tip of something much larger, an emotional state that shows up in tone, pacing, and presence long before it shows up in vocabulary. The zoomed-out truth is this: women are rarely responding to what a man says in isolation. They are responding to the emotional signal underneath it, whether he is reactive or steady, anxious or secure, performing or genuinely present. Learn to embody that steadiness, and the specific words you use become almost secondary. You could say, "take your time," or you could say something entirely different in the same spirit, and it would still land, because the underlying signal is what actually does the work. You do not need to overanalyze every conversation now, searching for the perfect moment to insert two words like a magic key. That would miss the entire point. What you now have is something more useful than a script, an understanding of what is actually happening beneath the surface of these moments, and the ability to recognize them as they arrive, rather than months later in hindsight. If you have ever said something similar without realizing why it worked, tell me the moment it happened in the comments. I read every comment on this channel because these small, specific stories are exactly what help other men recognize the same pattern in their own lives. On this channel, we look at the quiet mechanics behind attraction, the parts nobody else is willing to slow down and actually explain. In the next video, I am going to show you the single pause older men use that says more than any sentence could, and why most men fill it with words instead of letting it work for them.